Paisley Park had always been Prince's sanctuary, his creative fortress where the outside world couldn't touch him. Within these walls, he was invincible, a musical deity who bent sound in time to his will, who could record a masterpiece before most people finished their morning coffee. But sanctuaries can become prisons, and fortresses can trap their builders inside. On a cold Minnesota morning in 2010, Manuela Testolini learned this lesson in the most brutal way possible when she found the love of her life lying unconscious on the floor of the very studio where he'd created magic. The next 15 minutes would unfold like a nightmare in slow motion, a desperate race against death itself, with Manuela's trembling voice on the phone to emergency services being the only thing standing between Prince and an early grave. She saved him that day, bought him 6 more precious years of life and music and moments. But as she would later discover, saving someone once doesn't mean you can save them forever, and the enemy Prince was fighting wasn't something any amount of love or intervention could ultimately defeat. If you want to hear more untold stories about music legends, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The 55,000 square foot complex known as Paisley Park stood in the Minneapolis suburb of Chanhassen like a monument to one man's creative vision. Prince had poured $10 million into building this space in 1985, transforming it into more than just a recording studio. It was his home, his laboratory, his escape from a world that constantly demanded pieces of him he wasn't willing to give. The building's exterior gave nothing away, a stark white and purple facade that revealed no secrets to the curious fans who occasionally drove past, hoping for a glimpse of the legend inside. But within those walls, Prince lived a life that existed outside the normal rules of time and space, working 20-hour days, sleeping 4 hours if he slept at all, creating music at a pace that seemed superhuman to everyone who witnessed it. The pain had started years earlier, an inevitable consequence of what Prince demanded from his body. Decades of performing in high-heeled boots, leaping from stage risers, executing dance moves that would challenge professional athletes, all of it had taken a toll that even Prince's legendary discipline couldn't overcome. His hips had begun to fail him, the joints grinding bone against bone with every step, every performance, every hour spent standing in the studio perfecting a guitar solo or vocal take. By 2009, the pain had become impossible to ignore. Walking was difficult. Standing for studio sessions left him in visible agony. The man who had commanded stages for hours now struggled with basic movements. In 2010, Prince agreed to hip replacement surgery. The operation took place at a private facility where confidentiality was guaranteed. The surgery went smoothly. Prince returned to Paisley Park confident he had solved the problem. But the recovery process introduced something into Prince's life that would prove infinitely more dangerous than any hip problem. The prescription painkillers, initially just Percocet to manage post-surgical discomfort, opened a door that Prince didn't realize he was walking through. Over the following months, Manuela noticed changes. His moods became unpredictable. He disappeared to the bathroom more frequently. Prescription bottles multiplied in medicine cabinets, far too many for someone whose surgery was months past. She tried to talk to him about it. Prince deflected every conversation. Their marriage began to fracture under the weight of secrets neither wanted to name. The walk through Paisley Park felt longer than usual. She passed gold records and photographs from legendary performances. The building felt empty in a way she couldn't define. She told herself Prince was fine, just lost in his work. The studio door was closed but not locked. Manuela balanced the coffee mug carefully and pushed the door open with her hip, expecting to see Prince hunched over the mixing console or playing guitar with the intense concentration that made him forget the outside world existed. She called out his name, her voice echoing slightly in the acoustically designed space. No response. The studio appeared empty, recording equipment powered down, the purple lights that usually illuminated the space dimmed to almost nothing. For a moment she thought he must have finally gone to bed, that she had somehow missed him in Paisley Park's maze of rooms. She started to turn around, to go check the bedroom, when something caught her eye. A shape on the floor behind the mixing console, barely visible in the dim lighting, that looked wrong somehow, unnatural, like something that shouldn't be there. Manuela set the coffee mug down on a nearby table and moved closer, her heart beginning to pound in a way that had nothing to do with the early morning hour. The shape resolved itself into something recognizable and impossible at the same time. Prince lay crumpled on the floor in a position that looked fundamentally wrong, as if he had simply collapsed mid-movement and fallen where he stood. His body was completely still, his purple silk shirt dark with sweat, his legendary curls plastered against his forehead. Even from a distance, even in the dim light, she could see that his skin had taken on a gray pallor she had never seen on him before. The coffee mug she had set down fell, or maybe she knocked it over, the sound of ceramic shattering against hardwood floor barely registering as she rushed toward Prince's motionless body. Her mind refused to process what her eyes were seeing, refused to accept that the man who had seemed invincible was lying unconscious on the floor of his own studio. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands shaking so violently she could barely touch him, terrified of what she would find when she did. His skin felt cold and clammy under her fingers, nothing like the warmth she expected, nothing like the body she had shared a bed with for 9 years. His breathing was so shallow it was almost imperceptible, his chest barely moving, the sound of air moving through his lungs faint and irregular. She pressed her fingers against his neck, searching for a pulse, finding it weak and erratic, a rhythm that felt all wrong. For one terrible, infinite moment she thought she had lost him, that she had woken up to find her husband already gone, that the life they had built together in this strange isolated sanctuary had ended while she slept peacefully just rooms away. Then she heard it. A faint sound that might have been a groan or might have been just air moving through his lungs, but it was enough to shock her into action. She grabbed her cell phone from the pocket of her robe with fingers that didn't want to cooperate, nearly dropping it twice before she managed to dial 911. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone, her vision blurring with tears she didn't remember starting to cry. When the operator answered, Manuela's voice came out in a rush. Information poured out in desperate fragments. My husband. Not breathing right. Unconscious. Cold. Please hurry. Panic made her voice crack. The operator's calm voice gave her tasks to focus on. Check his breathing. Clear his airway. Roll him onto his side. Manuela answered everything she could while her mind raced through possibilities, trying to understand what could have caused this. He hadn't been drinking. Prince never drank. There was no smell of alcohol, no empty bottles, no obvious explanation for why a perfectly healthy man would suddenly collapse in his own studio. She looked around frantically, searching for clues, searching for anything that might explain what was happening. And then Manuela's eyes caught something that made her blood run cold. Something that revealed this wasn't just an accident. This was a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight. Then she saw them. Prescription bottles on the floor. Percocet. Multiple bottles, different doctors, overlapping dates. This was an overdose. The operator was asking about medications, about anything Prince might have taken, about his medical history. Manuela found herself explaining about the hip replacement, about the post-surgical painkillers, about the bottles she was now holding with a growing sense of horror as she realized what she was seeing. This wasn't a random medical emergency. This wasn't some mysterious illness or undiagnosed condition. This was an overdose. Prince had overdosed on prescription painkillers in his own studio while she slept nearby. The realization hit her like a physical blow. How long had this been happening? How had she not seen this coming? The operator was talking to her, telling her the ambulance was on its way, asking her to stay on the line, asking her to keep monitoring Prince's breathing. Manuela pressed her fingers against his neck again, checking his pulse, finding it still weak but present, still fighting. She put her hand on his chest, feeling the shallow rise and fall, counting breaths, praying in a way she hadn't prayed since childhood. Please don't leave me. Please hold on. Please let the ambulance get here in time. The ambulance arrived within 9 minutes, though it felt like hours. She heard voices, footsteps running. She stood and ran to let them in, leading the paramedics back to where Prince lay unconscious, surrounded by prescription bottles. The paramedics moved with efficient precision that seemed almost choreographed. They assessed Prince's condition, checked his vital signs, asked Manuela questions that she answered in a voice that didn't sound like her own. One of them picked up the prescription bottles, read the labels, exchanged a look with his partner that confirmed what Manuela already knew. This was an opioid overdose. This was exactly what it looked like. What happened in the next 60 seconds would determine whether Prince saw another sunrise. The decision the paramedics made, the medication they administered, would buy him 6 more years of life. But it couldn't buy him salvation. One of the paramedics pulled out a small nasal spray device and administered it to Prince, inserting it into his nostril and pressing the plunger. Narcan, they explained. Naloxone. It reverses opioid overdoses. If this was what they suspected, Prince should respond within seconds. Manuela watched, holding her breath, as the medication entered Prince's system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Prince's breathing changed, becoming stronger, more regular. His eyelids fluttered. His body tensed and relaxed in a way that suggested returning consciousness. He made a sound, a groan that might have been pain or confusion or simply the shock of being pulled back from wherever the opioids had taken him. His eyes opened slightly, unfocused and confused, before closing again. They needed to transport him to the hospital for observation, the paramedic explained. They needed to make sure the Narcan had fully counteracted whatever was in his system, needed to run tests and monitor his condition for at least 24 hours. Standard procedure for opioid overdoses. Non-negotiable medical necessity. But Prince was already coming around, and as his consciousness returned, so did his personality, his need for control, his absolute refusal to let his private struggles become public knowledge. His eyes opened fully, focused on the paramedics surrounding him, saw Manuela standing nearby with tears streaming down her face. He tried to sit up. The paramedics tried to stop him. He pushed their hands away, his voice hoarse but firm. He wasn't going to any hospital. He was fine. This was just a miscalculation. It wouldn't happen again. The paramedics tried to explain the risks, tried to make him understand that opioid overdoses required medical observation, that he could stop breathing again once the Narcan wore off, that he needed professional help. Prince refused. He was coherent enough to refuse treatment. He understood the risks and accepted them. He would sign whatever paperwork they needed releasing them from liability, but he wasn't leaving Paisley Park. Manuela watched this unfold with a growing sense of helplessness, knowing she couldn't force him to accept help he didn't want, knowing that revealing what had happened would destroy the carefully maintained privacy that Prince valued more than almost anything else in the world, perhaps even more than his own life. The paramedics had him sign forms acknowledging that he was refusing transport against medical advice, that he understood the risks, that the responsibility was now his alone. Then they left. The ambulance pulled away from Paisley Park, sirens silent now, taking with them the last chance for intervention that might have changed what happened next. Manuela helped Prince to their bedroom, settled him under the purple sheets he insisted on having changed every Friday, watched his eyes close as exhaustion claimed him. And then she sat beside him, listening to him breathe, terrified to look away in case he stopped, in case this brief reprieve was all she was going to get. When Prince woke hours later, he didn't want to talk about what had happened. He treated the entire incident as if it were a minor inconvenience, a temporary glitch in his otherwise perfectly controlled existence. He promised Manuela it wouldn't happen again. He assured her the painkillers were necessary for his hip, that he had just taken too many by accident, that he had the situation completely under control. And Manuela, desperate to believe him, desperate to return to some semblance of normal life, let herself accept these explanations even though a voice in the back of her mind whispered that nothing about this was normal or controlled. But what Manuela didn't know as she watched Prince refuse help that day was that 6 years later, in the exact same building, history would repeat itself. Only this time, there would be no phone call to make. No ambulance to save him. No second chance. Their marriage ended in 2007. Manuela moved out, unable to save someone who refused to be saved. Prince continued living and working at Paisley Park, maintaining his impossibly demanding schedule, producing music at the same furious pace. He performed at the Super Bowl in 2007, delivering what many critics called the greatest halftime show in the event's history. To the outside world, he remained the same enigmatic genius he had always been, the legendary performer who defied aging and mortality through sheer force of talent and will. But the people close to Prince began noticing changes. He was thinner than he had ever been, his already small frame seeming to shrink further. His famous energy would occasionally desert him, moments when he seemed to fade right in front of their eyes, though he always rallied, always pushed through, always insisted he was fine. Nobody dared confront him directly about what they were seeing. In 2016, 6 years almost to the day after Manuela had found him unconscious, Prince's battle with opioid dependency reached its inevitable conclusion. On April 15, he was found unconscious on his private plane after it made an emergency landing in Illinois. The official story was that he had the flu. The truth, revealed later, was another opioid overdose, another administration of Narcan by paramedics, another narrow escape from death. But unlike the incident in 2010, this one became public knowledge, impossible to hide from a media machine that immediately began speculating about what was really happening to the legend. 6 days later, on April 21, 2016, Prince was found dead in an elevator at Paisley Park. The autopsy revealed lethal levels of fentanyl in his system, far exceeding anything a human body could survive. The investigation uncovered that he had been taking what he thought were Vicodin pills, not knowing they were actually counterfeit medications laced with fentanyl, the synthetic opioid that is 50 times more potent than heroin. One of those pills alone contained enough fentanyl to kill several people. Prince had died not because he wanted to, not because he had given up his battle, but because the enemy he was fighting had evolved into something even more deadly than the addiction itself. The counterfeit pills that killed him represented a threat that even his legendary control and discipline couldn't protect against, a danger that existed precisely because addiction had forced him into the shadows, into obtaining medications through channels that couldn't guarantee their safety. Looking back at that morning in 2010 when Manuela Testolini found Prince unconscious on the studio floor, it's impossible not to see it as a warning that went unheeded. The 15 minutes she spent on the phone with emergency services, the quick action of paramedics who administered Narcan and brought him back from the edge of death, all of it bought Prince 6 more years. But those 6 years also represent a missed opportunity, a period when intervention might have changed the trajectory of what was happening. Prince's refusal to go to the hospital that day, his insistence that he could handle the problem on his own, his determination to keep his struggle private at all costs, all of these decisions seemed understandable in the moment but proved fatal in the long run. Paisley Park still stands in Chanhassen, Minnesota, open to the public as a museum after Prince's death. The elevator where Prince was found dead remains off limits to tours, cordoned off as a space too heavy with tragedy to be treated as just another museum stop. It stands as a silent reminder of where the story ended, the final location in a journey that began with unmanaged pain and progressed through addiction and denial until there were no more chances left. Manuela moved on after her divorce, remarrying and focusing on charitable work. She has maintained dignified silence about her marriage. The morning she saved Prince's life stands as both triumph and tragedy. She kept him alive for 6 more years. But those years weren't enough.